I never expected a library corner to change my life. It was the second semester of college, and I had just transferred to a new university, eager to escape my past and find a fresh start. That's when I met Anaya. Quiet, composed, always scribbling. Something in her weathered notebook. She wasn't the kind of person who stood out in a crowd, but there was something about her presence that drew me in. Something soft yet impossible to ignore. We officially met during a group assignment. While others argued over roles, she calmly offered to take the research lead. I volunteered to help, more out of curiosity than responsibility. Over time, what started as collaboration evolved into late-night conversations and casual study sessions that stretched long past dinner. She wasn't like anyone I'd known. Behind her guarded smile was someone full of contradictions, deeply thoughtful yet oddly impulsive when it came to trusting people she barely knew. And somehow, she trusted me. Anaya spoke little of her personal life, but in rare moments of openness she shared fragments. Her father was often away on business. Her mother had left when she was 13. She lived alone in a small house near campus, managing adulthood with a maturity that made her seem older than her years. I listened, not just with sympathy, but with a growing admiration. It became clear she wasn't just another girl from class. She was someone worth protecting, someone whose quiet strength masked wounds she tried hard to hide. For weeks, we walked home together after class. I started memorizing her routines, her favorite coffee order, the way she laughed with her eyes before her lips. I didn't know whether we were drifting towards something romantic or simply finding solace in each other's presence, but whatever it was, it felt real. Unlike anything I'd known before. One evening, as we sat on the grass watching students play volleyball, she leaned her head on my shoulder. No words, no explanation, just quiet contact that said more than anything we'd spoken. That moment anchored everything I'd been feeling. I wanted more than friendship, but I was afraid to risk what we already had. Weeks passed, and the ambiguity remained. Still, she began inviting me over to her house more often, mostly on weekends when she felt lonely, as she put it. We'd cook together, watch movies, sometimes fall asleep side by side on the couch. It all seemed innocent, yet something deeper pulsed beneath the surface. I never pushed. I told myself I was respecting her space. Maybe I was also protecting myself from rejection. But what we shared wasn't sustainable. There were too many unspoken words between us, too many assumptions. Held in silence. I didn't realize it then, but something was building, something that would change everything with just one night, one misunderstood gesture. And I wasn't ready for what that moment would reveal. It was a rainy Friday evening when I received her message. "Rough day, I just want to disappear for a while." I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard, unsure how to respond. We'd grown so close over the past few months, yet the line between friendship and something more remained dangerously blurred. Instead of replying, I made a decision. I knew her routines, her habits, how she always left the side door unlocked on weekends, especially if she expected me. We'd never discussed it, but it had become a quiet understanding. I thought showing up unannounced would be comforting, a small act of care when words felt inadequate. By the time I arrived, the rain had softened to a drizzle. The house was quiet. I let myself in and found her asleep on the living room couch, curled up in a faded hoodie, her hand resting on a half-read novel. The glow of a muted television flickered across her face, casting long shadows along the wall. I stood there for a moment, unsure. Part of me considered leaving. Another part felt anchored to the room by something deeper. Concern, affection, perhaps a longing I hadn't fully acknowledged. I sat gently beside her, careful not to disturb the rhythm of her breathing. The silence felt sacred, fragile. Minutes passed. The room was cold. Without thinking too much, I reached for the blanket draped on the back of the couch and pulled it over us. Then slowly, I laid down beside her, not touching, not invading, just sharing warmth in a moment that felt still and deeply human. At some point, I must have drifted off. I woke to her voice, sharp, startled, trembling. "What are you doing?" She had backed away, clutching the blanket around her shoulders like a shield. Her eyes were wide, blinking fast, caught somewhere between confusion and fear. I sat up instantly, my pulse pounding. Anaya, I didn't mean to scare you. I thought... You thought what? That this was okay? Her voice cracked on the last word. I couldn't find the right words. Everything I wanted to say felt clumsy and inadequate. I tried to explain how I thought I was offering comfort, how I never meant to cross any lines. But she wasn't listening. Her trust, that unspoken bond we'd spent months building, had shattered in seconds. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just asked me to leave, and I did. As I stepped back into the rain, guilt clung to me like the wet fabric on my skin. I kept replaying the moment, questioning every decision, every assumption. Had I misread everything? Was I blind to the boundaries I'd crossed? What haunted me most wasn't her reaction. It was the realization that the space between love and betrayal can be terrifyingly small. And I feared I had just stepped over it. The silence that followed was worse than any argument I could have imagined. Anaya vanished from my life as though I had never existed in hers. She didn't block me outright, not at first. My messages were marked seen, my calls went unanswered. Each passing day without a response gnawed at the edges of my sanity. I thought time would soften her anger, that she would remember the boy who always listened, always showed up. But I underestimated the depth of her disappointment. A week later, I found myself staring at her across the campus courtyard. She walked briskly, earbuds in, surrounded by friends, her expression unreadable. When our eyes met, there was no flicker of recognition, only a subtle tightening of her jaw. Then she turned away. That night, I noticed she had finally blocked me. Rumors began swirling, subtle at first. Whispers in the library, side glances during lectures. I didn't know what version of the story was out there, but it was clear I had become someone else in people's eyes. Some looked at me with suspicion, others with quiet pity. The most painful part was that no one asked me what had happened. They didn't need to. The silence told its own story. I kept replaying that night over and over, not to justify it, but to understand how something that had felt like compassion had turned into betrayal in her eyes. I had made assumptions about her comfort, her boundaries, the closeness we shared. And that night, every unspoken thing between us had erupted without warning. Then, 2 weeks later, I saw her again. This time, not alone. She was holding hands with someone. A tall guy with an easy smile and the kind of confidence that didn't have to work for attention. I didn't know who he was, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that she was laughing again. It hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't angry, at least not with her. I was angry with myself for believing I meant more than I did, that I was different, that I was the one she'd choose when the time came. I felt disposable, like a chapter in her story she'd hurried to finish. I withdrew from everything, skipped classes, ignored friends, even avoided the coffee shop we used to visit together. I wasn't just grieving her. I was grieving who I thought I was in her eyes. I had built so much meaning into our time together, only to realize it might have been one-sided. Still, somewhere deep down, I held on to the hope that there was more to the story. That maybe, just maybe, one day, she'd speak. And I would finally hear the truth behind her silence. Because even after everything, I needed to know if she ever truly cared. Months passed, and life moved on. But the questions stayed with me like shadows I couldn't shake. I poured myself into schoolwork, buried my emotions beneath routine, yet nothing filled the emptiness Anaya had left behind. Despite everything, I still wanted closure. I needed it. Not for us, but for myself. It wasn't until the last week of the semester that fate handed me a final chance. I saw her again, alone this time, seated on a park bench near the old library we used to visit. She was sketching in her notebook, the same weathered one I'd seen countless times before. My chest tightened. I hesitated, unsure if I should approach. But something in her expression, soft, distant, no longer guarded, told me the time had come. I walked over slowly. She noticed me, closed the notebook, and met my gaze. There was no hostility, only a long pause, an unspoken question between us. "Can I sit?" I asked quietly. She nodded. The silence that followed wasn't tense, just thick with things unsaid. I didn't expect forgiveness. I didn't even expect a conversation. But what came next was something I could never have predicted. "I wasn't angry because you laid next to me," she began, her voice low but steady. "I was angry because I trusted you not to assume what I couldn't say." Her words hit like a sudden wind, cutting and clear. I wasn't ready. Not for that. Not for what it might have meant, she continued. That night I felt vulnerable. I needed space, not company. But I didn't know how to ask for it without pushing you away. I stayed silent, absorbing her honesty. It wasn't just about that night. It was about how we'd built something on assumptions, never daring to define what we were. "I did care," she added. "But I also feared you were more in love with the idea of saving me than truly knowing me." That hurt more than anything, because maybe it was true. Maybe I had mistaken my need to protect her for love, romanticized her pain to make sense of my own. I realized then that love without clarity becomes projection, and I had projected too much. "I'm sorry," I said finally, not for what I had done, but for what I hadn't understood. For not asking, for not listening closely enough to the things she didn't say. She nodded. "I'm not angry anymore. I just needed time." We parted with a handshake. Awkward, sincere, final. No promises of reunion, no lingering looks, just quiet acceptance that our story had run its course. That night, as I walked home beneath a pale sky, I felt lighter. Not because I had won her back, but because I had finally let go, with truth, not regret. Some love stories don't end with togetherness. Some end with understanding.